Welcome to Pixel Therapy, the video game podcast where we look at the games we play through the lens of the player, where what you play is just as important as how you play it, and where emotional intelligence is a critical stat. I'm your co-host, Jamie, pronouns she, they.
And I'm your co-host, Spencer, pronouns they, them.
And this is Pixel Therapy. I know it's been a minute since you've had a podcast for most folks. Thank you for all of your patience. It's summertime and there's things going on, and so we've had to delay a little bit. But we have a really special episode for everyone today with a couple of super special guests that I'm going to introduce here in a moment. But first, let's start as we always do with our Patreon shoutouts. This is our special thank you to everyone who's subscribed at our Patreon name in the credits tier. So that's a very big thank you to Genevieve, Lindsay, Pimhatai, See the Mess, Ava, and Alexis. Thank you all so much for your continued support of the show. Remember, if you want to get your name in the credits, you can hop on over to patreon.com/pixeltherapypod, where you can subscribe for free to stay up to date on all things Pixel Therapy, or for as little as $2 a month, you can get access to our Patreon exclusive monthly bonus episodes, which we'll be recording July's tomorrow, I think. Spoiler alert. If you're looking for other ways to support the show, please consider rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. And you can also check out and subscribe to the Pixel Therapy Pod YouTube channel, which is here if you're watching right now, youtube.com/@pixeltherapypod, where you can catch us streaming our Let's Play series, Pixel Therapy Plays, live on Wednesdays and Sundays. And of course, after all of that, know that no matter how you choose to engage with us, we appreciate you being here all the same. All right, it's time to get cozy. Time to pull up an armchair. Feel free to lie down on the couch and talk about our feelings. Spencer, let's introduce our guests that we have with us today. Today, we have not just one, but two exciting guests with us from independent studio Sunset Visitor, developer of, I meant to ask you before we started, is 1000xRESIST or 1000? In my head, I keep saying 1000xRESIST, but it's 1000xRESIST. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. But we have Remy, the creative director and founder of the studio, and Pinki, who's one of the narrative designers and writers. Remy and Pinki, thanks so much for joining us today on Pixel Therapy. How are you both doing?
Good.
Very happy.
Yeah, very happy
for having us.
Of course. Thanks for your time today. We're going to be talking a lot about 1000xRESIST, but before we get into that, I was wondering if you both could tell us a little bit about yourself. We want to kind of hear, first and foremost, do you consider yourself a gamer? And can we start with Pinki? Do you consider yourself a gamer, Pinki?
For sure. That's a juicy question. I think Remy knows where I'll go with this. And yeah, unequivocally, why would I lie? I'll say no. I wouldn't say that. Yeah, I didn't grow up around games. And so the entry into gaming culture and industry is a very new thing for me. Yeah, my background is in dance, movement, and choreography. And over my professional creative career, it's mostly been, it's been movement, it's been voice, it's been text-based. And so this kind of like shift into game development is a new phenomenon.
Awesome. What about you, Remy?
I think I would consider myself a gamer. Definitely that some of my earliest impactful artistic experiences were playing kind of these video games when I was younger, and it made me want to study music and study fiction and study the arts, I guess. That was kind of my like gateway into the arts, was playing video games. And then kind of realizing that it wasn't like in the 90s, so it was very difficult to just go and make a video game. So I guess I started writing, and I started writing music and things like this instead.
Any titles you want to name drop?
Well, I think it is. I feel like a broken record, but like I mean, I played Final Fantasy VII at a very specific age where it like really impacted me, and then subsequent Final Fantasy games. I think those were like my like just looking forward to them as they were coming out, and so those were really impactful. And then I would say also point and click adventure games as well, like in the 90s. So I think like Monkey Island, The Dig, Grim Fandango, and all that stuff. So yeah, So
Classics.
yeah, to answer the question, I guess I would consider myself a gamer.
Awesome. So what's the story of how Sunset Visitor came together?
Yeah. So as I was saying, like, even though I my gateway into the arts was through video games, I didn't really, for a long time while I was studying and then practicing after studying, I didn't really make that a big part of my artistic practice in the performing arts. So Pinky and I were both in the performing arts. We both kind of studied at the same art school, and so that felt like a little bit of a disconnect for me. But then over time, I started to make it a little bit more part of my practice. And then Pinky and I also co-founded a nonprofit arts organization called Hong Kong Exile, which is a performing arts organization where we did multidisciplinary art. We also have another co-founder. So there was 3 in total, but still video games was not a big thing. And then slowly over time, we were bringing video games into the room. And then personally into my own practice. And then the pandemic, I guess, happened. And there was no real performing arts happening at that time. Or like, I shouldn't say that. I should say performing arts was in a crisis during that period of time, for reasons that we could not gather. And lots of shows in mid-production had to kind of navigate a very difficult scenario. And then for me, I was already kind of learning Unity and trying to do a kind of side solo dev thing. And I just started working on the prototype for this game during the pandemic. And then after that was done, we pitched publishers, all that stuff, less interesting maybe in this context. And then Pinky came on as a writer, narrative designer once we kind of figured all that out, and then the studio was founded, and we started production for the game, restarted production for the game around like July 2021, and so it was a little bit born out of desperation and also kind of like, if there's any time to do this kind of thing, I guess it's now. And then also born right into production. So, yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I don't talk about this a lot on the podcast, but my day job is working in like, I'm a box office manager for a live performance theater, and yeah,
Oh, nice.
it was a scary time for a lot of industries, but like especially theater makers, just trying to figure out how we were going to tell stories without the ability to gather in large groups. Pinky, for you coming in with all of the different mediums and stuff, like what was it like entering as like a game writer now? Like how do you feel about that jump? And what was interesting about it for you? Like what did you learn in that process?
Yeah. It was so painful. It was really painful. The onboarding was really, it was a really steep learning curve. As you heard, I think, I was listening to Remy talk about being a gamer and being a gamer from early on. I think my relationship with screens has never been an intimate one. It's never been a particularly embodied one, even though it can be, but I had not that relationship. And so, yeah, there's a couple of things that the whole like sitting and staring at a screen for long durations of time. Yeah, I had to figure that one out. Like had to stay like connected to the work and sit down and do it. There was, in terms of even the way that I express or the way I think about storytelling, I'm like a very scattered, rhizomous, abstract, pretty ephemeral type of a animal. And I have often resisted, particularly in literature, like I resist like high drama, high affect, emotional manipulation sometimes is what it feels like. And the kind of more like Western tropes of narrative storytelling. And so I think it was like I had to jump a couple of hoops in terms of my own mental blockers, I would say, to really connecting maybe what excites me in writing and in storytelling, and finding a way, my own way into these characters, into what happens to them, and how to share that in a way that felt true to me. Yeah. And then also just I feel like dialogue in this game, it's an interesting constrained platform to say a lot of things in not many words. And actually, I think that game for me was maybe one of the more exciting ones. I was like, how much can you say, or how much can you leave unsaid? A lot of things like the poetics of writing for video game is maybe something that I really over the years had to find synergy with.
Yeah. Okay. So let's start digging into the game, to 1000 times resist the game. Just a quick kind of setup for folks, if you're coming in kind of fresh and this is the first time you're hearing about it. 1000 times resist is a sci-fi narrative adventure game, which feels like not enough words to encapsulate what this game is. But let's just say, bottom line, sci-fi narrative adventure game published by Fellow Traveler. It came out this past May on Nintendo Switch and PC, and it's received a ton of praise following its release, including overwhelmingly positive reviews on Steam. It's got a 9 out of 10 from IGN. Y'all got 3 nominations at the 2024 Independent Games Festival Awards, including Excellence in Narrative and the Seamus McNally Grand Prize, as well as other award nominations. We're going to try to be sensitive to spoilers here on the podcast today, but this is a super narrative-focused game with a lot of dense lore and story to unpack. So we're going to do our best to avoid anything that's really like best experienced in the game itself. But just for folks who are listening, if you haven't played the game, listen to this at your own risk, and we'll try to tag things that we feel are really spoilery as we go, and we'll mark it in the show notes and stuff. But listener beware, is what I'll say there. But yeah, so 1000 times resist is set many years into the future, where these alien beings called occupants have invaded Earth with a mysterious illness that has affected all but one teenage girl named Iris, who's a first-generation Chinese-Canadian daughter of immigrants from Hong Kong, who's somehow immune to the virus. Iris leaves her parents behind to join a military research ship that's looking for a cure. And many years later, in the future, which is where the majority of the game takes place, Iris is still alive, but is now called the ALLMOTHER, and she presides over hundreds of clones of herself that call each other sisters and live in a secluded society. Some sisters are able to ascend ranks, gaining a color and a name matching their functions. So we have these core functions of knowers, healers, watcher, fixer, bang bang fire, and they're all led and managed by a sister called Principal. In the game, you play as Watcher, who starts the game as a dutiful servant of the ALLMOTHER, and Watcher's role is to watch, which you as the player perform by visiting and observing the ALLMOTHER's memories, often while commuting with one of your other sisters. And it's through conversations with your sisters and the observance of the ALLMOTHER's memories that Watcher and the player begin to unravel the mystery, secrets, and even lies that this society is built on. That was our attempt at a succinct
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Really good. I like that a lot.
Okay, great. Thank you. We put a lot of thought into that. So I need to start with the most important question, of course. Pinki and Remy, we need to know which sisterly function would you personally serve if you existed in this society, and why? Who wants to go first?
Maybe you should go first.
No, I think Remy goes. We've discussed this, and we already know. I think we already know.
Ooh, okay.
Okay.
So you start there.
Yeah. So one of the things I always say is that one of my favorite sisters to write is a knower, and I feel it's because like knowers always put in these situations that I really relate with, and it has to do with being this is funny because we were just talking about this, like being in the arts and being a person of color, and then also working with arts organizations inside and outside of larger institutions and things like this, and having to kind of straddle this specific line to achieve some kinds of progress.
Mm.
That's where, like, at least I was writing from when writing for Nowhere, and so I would say Nowhere. although although I would also, I mean, this is cheating, so I don't want to say, I don't want to pick two. Like, if I had to pick one, it would be Nowhere.
Yeah.
But there's a degree in which I also imbue a lack of patience in that I have into Fixer. So yeah.
Real.
That's really funny because those are the ones that predominantly Remy wrote. The running joke is that I basically took my personality and I split them between BBF and healer. But in terms of, because I think Jamie, you asked like who would we want to be, or who do we resonate most with?
I asked which sisterly function would you serve and why?
Yeah, when you asked, I think I immediately thought healer first. Kind of just like a very very all hands, like just getting messy and dirty with it, like let's save some people, let's fix like kind of a fixer, but from a health place, I think, from a place of care, from a place of like trying to do good. And I think healer is kind of wearing her heart on her sleeve too, and is covered in blood at the same time. Like, yeah, I feel like there's something both grotesque and true about healer's conditions that I could see myself. And pink, her type of pink is a great color. So yeah, I'm all for it.
Yes. I feel like that tracks, as I think you mentioned you had a background in movement and dance, and someone being so embodied. I think that tracks that you would resonate with healer.
Yeah, and she's also kind of got like this dark edge, like and a little suspicious with her with her mien sometimes, like holding a scalpel. I'm the youngest of my family, and was like a real troubled child. Like, it came out of the womb like with a lot of despair and like really high low in terms of personality. And so I feel like I see that in healer, and I feel like you asked about function, but now I'm thinking about character. But regardless,
Awesome.
To a certain
Well,
extent,
thank
I
you
would
for
also
that.
say that both of us would maybe relate to principal in some form or fashion, having had to run projects and things like this.
Oh God, yeah.
yeah,
Right. I think birthing any theater, or like having to corral so many people and create something from nothing, like totally I see that.
Yeah, but do we want that is the question. Did we end up as principal, or would we like it? I think I think that there's a differentiation between like what function would you want and what function does society have you and capitalism have you playing, whether you like it or not.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, digging into the game a bit more, we mentioned that 1000xRESIST is a narrative adventure. Some might liken it to what we call walking simulators, but it's decidedly not that. It's not just any one genre. So I'm curious to hear from you, like, what do you think sets 1000xRESIST apart from other similar games in that kind of in that genre, and what were you trying to do differently with this game?
I think this is something that I started to say during development, which is I really feel like 1000xRESIST is a narrative game that really loves video games, and openly so. Whereas, like, I think there was a period of time in the early 2000s, especially with walking simulators, there was a degree in which they did not want to, they wanted a clean break, so to speak, from a degree of video game history, and things that maybe not, they were a little bit more, quote unquote, for the lack of a better word, um, pure in this sense that they wanted to be like, okay, let's look at it from a very immersive kind of first person place, and used very specific tools and had very specific kinds of constraints um, on that as a form. I know that we call them walking simulators at the time, but like, oh, sorry, now, but at the time, I remember being very excited about like, oh, these walking simulators are trying to do something very specific, and it seems like there's a degree in which they have formal language now that they're trying to build. But a lot of that kind of formal language seems like it wanted a break from other kind of video games of different genres or in within kind of video game history. But so I would say to a certain extent, 1000 Times Resist is more messy in that regard. It's I think we do want to acknowledge all the various types of games and that have come through and other different types of narrative games, and use them as not only reference points, but like not like kind of acknowledge the knowledge that's being carried inside of a player's head coming into the game, and then reference that and use that as some sort of thematic or formal tool. Yeah, I guess this was always, at least in my mind, kind of like trying to set it apart, and of course anybody who makes walking simulators are trying to make narrative games where there's no hard systematic mechanics. We all kind of loathe the term. We've come to we've come to adopt the term, of re-co-opting the term, and then figuring out a way to use it. But I do think it's that, and I think that another big difference is that we were actively trying to do is that in a lot of walking simulators, say like in Gone Home or Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, or much of what was important, or much of the content itself happened already, and you kind of you kind of explore and understand it through the kind of detritus of things. And to a certain extent, you do that in 1000 Times Resist as well. But we were very like, okay, this story has to happen like to you actively while you're playing it. It has to actively kind of unfold as you are going, as opposed to something that has happened already and you're just kind of looking. I mean, that again, that feels untrue because there's so much that has already happened in the game that you are discovering. But the way that we wanted to present it was that it was like, felt present in a way that
it's so much more urgent than I think a lot
yes
of walking simulators feel like. I mean, even when I'm in ALLMOTHER's memories commuting with a sister, like there's a sense of urgency to trying to figure out what the core piece of this memory is and what I'm going to glean from it. So I think you conveyed that well.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
It's like another big influence is Kentucky Route Zero, and it's really just like, okay, we're following to a certain extent a lineage of what Kentucky Route Zero did for us, which was just like, okay, forget the puzzles, forget the let's explore affect, let's explore staging, let's explore all the things that it does, right? So there was a degree in which we are really following in the conversation of that, which feels like interesting, because I guess time is funny, and I guess Kentucky Route Zero is quite old now. It's quite not. I wouldn't say it's old like in like the longer macro timeline of art. It's really young, right? But because video games is always moving so quickly, it's like several eras of indie games have like passed since then. So yeah, those were kind of various ways that we were trying to look at the narrative game and push it a little bit in different directions.
If KRZ is old, you're saying I'm old, Remy.
Well, I'm old. I'm saying I'm old. I'm just admitting that I'm old.
We all can be old together.
Yeah. So something that really stood out to us too, that we find is quite rare in sort of narrative games at this scale, is the fact that it's fully and beautifully voice acted. We were curious if it was like if there was a reason it was important to the team for it to be fully voice acted. And on that note, Secretary in particular, that character, for a floating diamond companion who has no face and and very little form, we were struck by how strong of an emotional bond we were able to form with this character. Their voice had a bit of a contrast to kind of the um, voices of the sisters and other characters in the game. So just from a auditory standpoint, there was a sharp contrast there, but also just their almost childlike.
Oh, technical difficulties.
Yeah, technical difficulties. But yeah, I think
Yeah.
if y'all want to talk about that a bit of, where that decision was to use voice actors, how did you select the voice for Secretary? Hopefully Spencer will rejoin us.
Yeah, Pinky, maybe you go for the voice.
I think especially coming from the performing arts, we were early on, I feel like we thought and decided, and in a bit of a crazy way, oh, this is going to be a fully a fully voiced game, and I don't think we necessarily knew how much work it was going to take at that time, and I don't think
Hi.
we knew exactly. Hi, Spencer, welcome back. Yeah, just talking about VO. I don't think when we decided it was going to be fully voiced, I don't think we
Having
knew
some
how
slight
many
technical difficulties, it
lines.
appears.
Oh yeah, we see you now and hear you now.
Sorry, you can continue. Pinky.
Yeah. So it was a substantive undertaking.
I see everyone, yeah.
Uh-oh. Okay.
Sorry, Spencer. We were able to continue when you fell off. So Pinky's just answering your question. Can you hear us now? Maybe not.
Maybe not.
All right, I'm gonna message Spencer.
Oh, I
separately.
see.
Lost again.
We can take a
All right, we're gonna take a quick break and we'll be right back. Sorry, everybody. And we're back. We're back, and Spencer's back, and we're all back. Okay.
We're all back.
Thanks, everyone, for your patience with that technical difficulty. We're going to pick up with the question that we left off on. Spencer, do you want to go ahead?
Sure thing. So we were asking about, it's not super common to see in narrative games at this scale to have them be fully voice acted. So we were curious if there was any particular reason it felt important to include that aspect, which we thoroughly enjoyed and added to the game as a whole. And for us, it's the character of Secretary, who is a floating kind of companion who provides information and context to the main character. But their voice itself was in sharp contrast to the rest of the cast, comprised primarily of the sisters. And it was just a character with this almost kind of childlike affect that we found ourselves bonding to emotionally throughout the game. And so we were curious if you could speak to that character in particular, also pronouns for Secretary, if that's a thing, and just kind of what your intent was with adding that character into the mix.
Yeah, I think Remy, you should go ahead because we did the who and how to voice Secretary was such an undertaking, and it
Oh,
was a really
interesting.
interesting process. So I would love to hear Remy speak about this.
Yeah, no, so okay. Secretary. So we always knew that, Secretary is a little bit of a riff on, all the kind of little companions that follow you in video games. And when we went to go cast Secretary, we were actually looking for specifically a kid.
Mm,
And I should quickly say that Secretary's pronouns are he, they. And
okay.
so when we went to do some casting, this is the one where we actually had to cast because we didn't really know a performer of that age. And so we got a bunch of casting things back, I guess. And then there was just this one voice who was just, well, Secretary, I guess. You've heard their voice at this point. And so it really was for me, it felt very young. It felt very innocent, and in this way that it also, I could, there's a degree in which I recognize that type of voice. I don't know from what.
Mm,
Um, for some reason, I could tell it was some kind of Asian Canadian kid of some
mm,
kind, and that was kind of, I don't know. We brought it to the writers, and we were like, well, what do you think about this? And I think we just kind of invested in that, and he was the first for the a majority of the game. Secretary was, I think, 12. The performer was like 12, and then very actively after for later parts of the game, we knew that we were just kind of on the cusp of like losing this Secretary voice forever. So we recorded everything as fast as we could with Secretary, and then we intentionally waited for Secretary, I guess, or the performer playing Secretary to quote unquote age, and then we, once it happened, once the voice started to change, we brought him back to record the rest of the game. So that was a nice thing. It's funny, we just had a cast party, and now he's like taller than all of us. and so I think for him, it must have spent like a big part of
Chunk of his life.
a big chunk of his life, So that's kind of that was really an interesting voice process, and I was happy to capture that kind of, so to a certain degree, like that younger Secretary no longer really exists. It only exists in the game.
wow.
I have a question. Can I ask Remy a question?
Sure.
Please.
Because there was a chunk of time where we weren't actually thinking about younger and I think maybe more innocent, because it's interesting how much Secretary has information that the sisters possibly don't, and is supposed to be has a bit of authority in a society where authority and knowledge is very particular and hierarchalized. And so I remember a period of time where we were kind of Rolodexing through our friend group, because a lot of our casting was reaching out to our performing arts community and the Vancouver performing arts community, being like, oh, who would be, and almost sometimes writing for specific personalities or like friends of ours, and then being like, oh, they're going to voice it later. So I can think of a time, Remy, where we were really kind of like, we had two specific friends in mind. And so I'm curious when it became clear to you and why that you were like, oh, we're gonna go young.
I think it was once I just heard his audition tape, and as I think you've both kind of mentioned, it's like it's a real contrast to all the other voices that we had, and it's also a very cute voice, right?
Yes.
And I just thought, thinking about all of the companions throughout that we were referencing already, like the pods and near Navi, and I'm sure there's many more. That my first thought was like, should we? And this is my decision progress. My decision process usually is like, no, we can't. But maybe, oh, you know what, that it could. Well, and then slowly over time, it was just like, yeah, you know what, let's do it. And part of it was just always seeking, like, okay, well, how can we do this in a really different way? How can we leap into a very unknown, different choice? Which is a lot of the things we did in the writing process as well. But like this was one of this in casting where it's just like, all right, okay, let's leap into this choice and then kind of really lean into it afterwards. So I really think it was just the first time hearing his voice, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe this kid auditioned for this part. And I think the casting call was very, we did not specified age. We were like, in fact, we encouraged younger performers to apply.
I mean, that's incredible because I feel like right away I was arrested from the first time that Secretary spoke. I don't know why I'm getting a little emotional right now, but like, it was just, that's incredible to me because his voice was just like such a balm in the kind of struggle and desperation of the narrative of the game. And it also was like, just, I wanted to protect him, even though as you play the game, you kind of learn that, I don't know, maybe there's more to it than that, but great casting decision there. And just a wonderful performance from that actor. So moving on a bit, so Secretary as a character in the game is integral to this concept of communions, where as Watcher, you're basically able to initiate these almost like dream sequences with other sisters where you're transferring memories and experiences in this shared space. And so in this kind of society where the sisters are often kind of holding back their true feelings behind a mask and holding back with what they might really want to say, communions, at least to me, felt like a place where all pretense sort of falls away and it's just the truth that's left in front of them. And I think when for me as a child of an Asian immigrant myself, there was a lot in the story that resonated deeply. And I think when we talk about oh my God, intergenerational trauma, I think relationships across generations, it can sometimes feel impossible to communicate across certain gaps. And if we had communions, maybe it would be a little bit easier to understand and empathize and see each other. And so I was curious what it meant for you and the team to sort of design this mechanic of communions into the game and kind of where the idea came from.
You should go for that, Pinki, first.
Oh no, I think you should. Okay, maybe I don't have anything to say to that. I'm actually just really moved by how you articulated.
Thank you.
how you articulated the connection between that rift and like what we don't, as first generation, like what we are unable to, what we don't have access to, and the kind of not necessarily violence, but the chasm of that inability, like just living such different lives than our parents. And what it would mean to be able to step into each other's shoes to maybe not fix the problem, but realize how different we are. I think that just very personally, that rings very, very true to something I'm learning in this lifetime. And that I think that that's maybe a thematic of the game, is like, what is the power of memory, actually? Like, what is the political and personal power of knowing where you came from and who you came from and why they are the way they are? And I think it's just such a mirror to, why am I the way I am? And I think for immigrants, that question is always just so alive. And I think particularly for my generation, with my parents having been the one to make the travel, I just hear a lot from others in my position as well, like how difficult it is to access those stories, how often previous generations don't want to tell those stories, and for many, many reasons, and why it might be that it's our generation that has both maybe the resources and the curiosity and the maybe safe enough distance enough to be to engage with some of that hard stuff, because of that distance. Actually, it's interesting, and now I'm just really going off, but we often talk about diaspora. I'm going. Remy and I have worked in this the diasporic experience as speculative fiction space for a long, long time. And it's this, so I really feel like I've been making dances into that chasm of longing, where you are looking back and forward, and there is there's just this longing that is so potent, can be so creatively potent, and that there's a certain level at which you have to fill in the gaps of what you think happened. That's the speculation. That's the artistry. That's the imagination. And that it is a privilege to be able to play in that space, that it's not, at least for us, I think depending on how close you are in proximity to maybe the harm or the traumas, maybe it needs to be the second generation, but just the power, now I forget what I was talking about, but that power of that longing and seeing, like taking that that energy and putting it into imagining it into these communions and using that as a playground. I think that's what's alive for me right now. Remy, you probably want to say things more concrete.
I think early on, I mean, the reason why, from a very formal place that it exists, is that we did want to find a way to engage in some kind of time travel storytelling, but without having to deal with the degrees of getting into a time, all the time, time loop mechanics stuff that we would have to deal with from a very kind of literal narrative perspective. But there was also something about I think one of the very earliest kind of, I don't know, images in my head about this game or this whole thing is just, somebody who kind of looked like Watcher, somebody who kind of was very obviously from the future, just kind of like standing in a crowd that was very obviously not their time. And And I think to a degree that is just, I've always been a little bit sentimental about time in this way. I don't know why. And often, like, I keep thinking about, like, all the places that I want to time travel to, and see if I had the opportunity. Like, one of them was, like, you know, definitely to see my grandparents in the 60s in Hong Kong before they left. And then the other is just thinking about what it was like to be in Hong Kong in the 80s, which is just something that I never got to experience. Yeah, so there's kind of building into this game from the very beginning, from the premise of the game, both from a narrative and, like, conceptual point of view, this longing, as Pinki was saying, this kind of sentimental longing for something that we don't know what it is exactly. Like, what are we longing for exactly? What is it that we don't have?
Totally.
But we are longing for it, and in many ways, I guess some power of fiction is wish fulfillment in that regard. So, to have a mechanism in world that allows you to go and do that is it was a play space that we wanted to get into.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Oh, go ahead, Pinki.
Oh, I just want to interject with with that sentimentality and that wish fulfillment, I think it was also, we did also have a desire to nuance it. When you have, when your wish gets fulfilled and then you go back and you're like, oh God, this is troubling. Like, then you find, when you start digging into your family dirt and you're like, oh, there were some bad actors. Like, it's interesting. I think that's just the thing, that there's this sentimentality, and there's the complexity of all humans at all times and all times. And so I think we also liked using this longing as a playground, and longing as like as a tool for what happens when you long for something and then it wasn't what you thought, and what that betrayal is like. And so I think communions allowed us to really, like, make alive this longing movement. What does it yield? And when does it surprise you? And did you actually want to know when you find out stuff that you weren't ready for? Yeah.
Absolutely. So we have a question in the chat. Before we get to it, I just wanted to ask one more question while we're kind of in our longing feels at the moment. And kind of, Pinki, what you were speaking to reminded me of an excerpt from this essay that I was reading. It's on cohost.org, and we'll post the link in the episode description and our podcast show notes for folks to check out later. But it was written by a Chinese-Indonesian game dev who goes by Castle online. And they wrote in this piece on 1000xRESIST, quote, "Iris is probably unaware that she longs for Hong Kong. She disciplines her daughters in the same way that her traumatized mother disciplined her. She can only emulate and teach the heritage that she still remembers. She longs for a home that can truly accept her, but that home has vanished from the face of the earth. So Iris suffers. Her daughters suffer. They all suffer from their nostalgia for Hong Kong." And Castle goes on to write that they feel like this game is for what they say, a generation of irises who have not been born yet, the children of refugees and immigrants from the aftermath of the Umbrella Movement in 2014 and in the 2019 and 2020 Hong Kong protests. And I noticed myself that the occupant arrival takes place in 2047, which is the same year that Hong Kong's basic law, which establishes it as to function as its own entity, will expire. And so there's uncertainty about what the future of the city will be. And so there's like a lot to unpack within that and within that essay. But this game has had a strong emotional impact on those in the Asian diaspora, as well as inspired those outside of the diaspora to learn more about Hong Kong's history and its struggle for independence. And as creators of this game, would just love to know, like, what impact has that had on you as creators, that you've inspired so many people who can reference that lived experience, but also those outside of it to learn more about it?
It's pretty wild. we didn't really think, like, it's wild, and I mean it's very meaningful to us. I think that's, you know, even while we were just we were away just now. Pinky and I had a indie game conference, and while we were traveling, I just kept like showing Pinky like, oh, look at this, can you believe this, someone wrote this, and then what about this, you know, like, and all of this, and it's something that you know, one, we're really grateful for. Like, I'm glad this is um reaching people and touching people in this, especially for Asian diaspora. The other aspect of it is that, you know, we're kind of getting used to this much wider distribution, reaching more people, because like in the performing arts, like there's a very limited set of group of people who can experience the work that we've done before. But I don't know, it really is to say. Also, we were a little bit worried, I don't know, maybe Pinky wasn't worried, but this is our normal mode of operating, is that when we are digging into the diaspora, like, we're not also just talking about degrees of representation that are always almost positive, because like we feel like that those portrayals are flatten our experiences, and and I mean, that is one thing that I think we consistently say that we're really proud about, is like, hey, we were able to tell this story, we were able to do it in this way, we were able to kind of address many of our concerns, and it was able to reach people. Like, it's a miracle that any indie video game, let alone one that gets released commercially and sold, I guess, gets to be made, and then additionally so that it gets to be made about specific content about diaspora in a way that like is fully leaned into that. And I just want to shout out both to our publisher and both to I guess the publisher, in the sense there really was no, it was kind of came out unfiltered, you know, like it really was, there was no sense of pushing to make this into something it was not, so that it could sell better in that sense. And my hope for it has always just been that, like, okay, after the fact that, like, it seems like it is making an impact for Asian diaspora players and other game devs, that hopefully, you know, beyond any selfish desires for the game to do well, I hope it does well, so that like it can show that, like, hey, we can tell diaspora stories in indie games in a way that and you don't have to shy away from certain things, and you can really get at it. And I hope that other publishers can see that and find ways that we can encourage more diaspora games. Because like another thing that I always think about is, like, we don't want to be representing fully all the diaspora games that may come out, or all of the, like, we just want many diaspora games to come out, so that it's like we have a body of work that we can look at and play. So yeah, maybe I'll give it to Pinky here.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that I agree. It's just really meaningful for us. I'm just sitting over here crying.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. It's such a good question. Yeah, I think in some ways, often I think many of the works that Remy and I have made together are either explicitly or implicitly like love letters to Hong Kong. I think when I think about how I wrote for this game, it really came from like the fear and the despair and the longing and the confusion and the like, I really appreciated that I had somewhere to put it. And when I play it, it's really cool because I actually play it from somebody else's point of view, even though I recognize the words. But yeah, so for people, I think the luxury of not being the creative director is that I just focused on my job, and my job was to tell the truth, my truth, in some shape or form. You know, So it was my heartbreak. It was my fear about the future. It was my big existential questions about what do we do when things disappear? Do we hold on to them, or do we understand that this is a natural, like this is history, this is how things happen in history? And so to hear people engage and feel and see themselves, or even from other diaspora groups, resonate, for folks to be kind of like sitting with some of those big questions about violence and loss and grief and trauma. It's super feels weird to say while I'm weeping, but it's super exciting. I think those are the thematics we really that's where the game and its creation was grounded. And so for it to be translating and transmitting and moving people, and creating certain maybe layers of empathy or questioning in themselves, cultural questioning, political questioning, I think it's so cool. It's so special. It is all we could possibly have dreamed of.
Absolutely. No, thank you both, and thank you, Pinki, for. I know you mentioned you were weeping, but I think that just speaks to, like, you've built something so special that it elicits a level of emotion and touches on something that, I think we don't often talk about the pain we carry as children of immigrants and across the Asian diaspora. We don't always talk specifically about our mental health and our emotional health with each other openly. And so I think just everything you're saying, like, it's okay to cry, and thank you for sharing that. Like, we should all be crying more, honestly.
Right. I do. I agree.
So we have some questions in the chat for a total conversational smash cut. We have a question. In the interest of time, we might not get to all of them, but just wanted to include a couple. And thank you for those tuning in for sharing your questions. But Marika asks, thank you for a wonderful game, first of all. And they ask, what were some of your personal favorite scenes, moments, or character interactions to write for the game? Maybe that's something for Pinki.
Ooh, I feel like I was just blabbing. Maybe I'll hand it to Remy first.
This is spoilers, so if you're gonna, so heads up for anybody listening. Now is the time to stop listening. So I think one of my, I mean, there's different scenes that I like for different reasons, but like one of my favorite scenes that I couldn't believe that we pulled off was the whole sequence at the end of chapter 6, which is going from the bar to the play. And then finally we get to insert a little play inside of the game, and we get to take some pot shots at theater, which is always something that we like to do. And going through the play, detonating the bomb at the stage, waking up, and then running, and then all of a sudden being spliced around to Hong Kong, and all of these things kind of converging at the same time, and then kind of getting on the train and seeing that BBF is alive, and then also subsequently seeing that Fixer is alive, and then you passing out, and all the timelines kind of just like, and then seeing all those secretaries. I don't know. I guess it's just like I keep thinking about it. I'm like, oh right, we also did that then, and we did that then. It was like a big moment where we were just like cashing in on all the things that we had set up for so long, and like one after the other in an escalation. So that was like, oh wow, I can't believe we got to a place where we could do that, but yeah, I'll say that just from a purely kind of storytelling level, that I was just like, damn, we got to that place. But
we did
maybe
that.
NG Pinki. Oh god.
Yeah. Oh, very many. I think what what I'm immediately, maybe because of the conversation we just had, like what stands out are the places I could cry and write, where I can, like, you know, place my own familial history and personal baggage into. I loved writing for the father. Because it is through him, you know, it's his, he's always thinking about Hong Kong, actually. Let's see, I really loved, there's a bunch of scenes that aren't in the game, but at the spoiler, at the end, when you're having all of these conversations, where time and spaces collapse, and so that means characters can be having impossible conversations with other characters. I really had a really juicy time putting two individuals in a room and seeing, can you reconcile the irreconcilable, or what are people who cannot reconcile going to say to one another? I really enjoyed that as a writing prompt. And what else? I quite enjoyed writing. I have a wonderful time with BBF. BBF kind of talks and thinks the way that I am at my core, and so when she's telling these terrible knock knock jokes, like, that really is like, I'm not funny, but I find me funny, and so BBF's just going off, just seeing the world the way that she sees the world, and so in general, a lot of BBF scenes.
Nice. Another question, speaking towards the ending, so spoilers. Does Principal's outfit in the Epitaph Red ending have a function aside from the obvious color symbolism, or is it just fashion?
Ooh. Yeah, okay, this is an interesting question. So what can I say about this? There is I think when we knew that we needed a future principal, so to speak. That's what we've been internally calling that principal model. It really was, I think we approached the art director, Kodai Yamagawa, and I was telling Kodai, it's like, all right, we need a principal that when you look at her, it's obvious that it's just some outrageous future of fashion to a degree. Like, it's like totally time has passed. Something's going on. Like, there's like eras have passed in between the kind of what has happened. Because you see from the first half of the game, the second half of the game, a more kind of gradual change in the the way that they look, and like kind of a slow progression of these things. But then because of the time gap, we needed quite a far degree of this distance again. So and much of the ending, when we were talking about that, was just like, how do we end this game? It was very difficult for us. It was like, I still think about how difficult it was. But we were talking that we did want to we had the chapter 1 demo at this point out, and people were talking about how it felt you were being thrust into this weird mystery and this disconnect and alienation, that we wanted to go back there at the end. We wanted to go back to that sense of feeling where it's like, all right, maybe we're at the end, but like, here's a bunch of things again, that I felt true to the spirit of the game, that it would not end, say, in a resolution, but it would end in another kind of opening of more questions and more mystery. And you see future blue as well, or future principal, depending on what goes on. And there were very specific instructions in the sense it's just like, okay, future blue is here along that timeline, and future principal is here along that timeline. And I'm just being careful right now, because it's just like, at the same time, a lot of the discussion about how they looked was just about like, okay, well, if we ever had the privilege to do another one, You know, like
Mm.
let's leave these things open here for specific reasons. So
You can say no more.
so,
Wait,
but
are
I
we
will
getting a
say that,
scoop
like,
right now? Is there a
no,
is there a
no.
sequel?
I will say that right now there's no immediate plans to it, but like
Yeah.
obviously as writers in our heads, we're always thinking about, you know, and the other thing to say about the future principal thing is that, you know, I think we've heard some podcasts and heard some interpretations where they felt like the future principal ending was negative, and that's an interesting sentiment. With the ending, I don't want to close too many loops for people. I want people to continue to think about it and unpack it themselves. But there's another thought that I'd always thought that future principal's outfit does look like some kind of it's gray. It's some degree of mourning in it. It feels to me, and yeah. So like when the question was about function, like what is principal's function in this period of time? Like we just call her principal, but like, you know, does she have a name now? Because has she picked a name? Like the other shells, like, you know, what does she call herself now? I think the UI says that it's principal only to let you know that it's principal. She looks different. But I think there's a lot that's unsaid in what has happened in between. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think any insight you have to give is great, and I like that answer. One more question from the chat: what happens to the sisters that the train takes to the other side?
I also can't answer that question.
Oh.
I shouldn't. and yeah, so I will, unfortunately, I will pass on that question in the spirit of
As is your right.
yeah.
But it's a good question.
That is a good question. It is a good question, and I'm glad people are thinking about it. So
Yeah. I guess something that popped to my mind that I guess would be my chat question is, you know, we see the relationship between like Watcher and Fixer, and the relationship between Zhao and Iris being something more than just sisterly. Like, yes, we are all clones of the All-Mother, but we're all individuals as well. And I guess the question I'm getting at is, like, I had a lot of feels navigating both of these independent relationships. Like, do you feel like there are threads of queerness or of even love beyond just friendship between these characters? And was that something intentional in the story?
I guess I'll speak for Zhao and Iris, because that's a relationship that and a back and forth that I was really invested in. I would definitely say so. I think that and I don't necessarily think it was explicit even between the two of them. Like, I think especially at that age, just thinking about who they were and what they were going through, it's always been clear to me what's going on, and how I kind of left it up to the characters how much they wanted to translate, or what they wanted to say to one another actually about that, at least overtly, especially when they were being surrounded by other people. There's a lot that's up against and pressing up against their relationship, and so I think while writing into that space, I also wanted to keep those questions and those feels available, so that the complexity of the situation was apparent.
Absolutely.
I would say that's the case with the sisters as well. Like it definitely is. I think the game doesn't like immediately focus on it because there's so many different things happening. But really, when we think about the sisters and we asked ourselves about, like, okay, let's look at this society and what would happen in it, and really for us, there's definitely love between the sisters in that way, and part of it is just, you know, I was talking to Pinki about this. Or it's like, you know, very much that humans will be humans and they'll find each other beautiful in certain ways, and that that society, it will happen, right? And so we didn't. I think there's many different cases where you see these, like, you see little things like this, like little romances between shells or things like this that we are kind of putting in there. But so yeah, that was very much intentional in that way. So
Cool.
yeah.
Well, as we head towards a close, there's one more theme that I wanted to touch on, and something that I really appreciated deeply within the game was this idea that all change and transformation is inherently violent, and that we can't necessarily bring everyone along with us on the path towards change. Like certain people, certain ideas must be left behind in order to create a better future. I think this is a message that feels particularly poignant in this current moment. And as an aside, one of my favorite lines from Iris's father is, he says, "We do not choose what we inherit." But I think we can choose, and I think what the game is saying as well is that we can choose how we move forward, what we take with us, and what we leave behind. And so the game, spoilers, builds up to this big choice, this big final choice at the very end of the game that can result in, I believe, 6 different endings. And I was curious, what was your hope for what players would take away with them in the process of making this big choice? And if any of that stuff I was saying about change and transformation resonated with you.
I'm for the people on the podcast. I'm pointing my hand at Pinki.
Okay, I'm being gestured at.
Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. I actually think you put it more succinctly than I could and can. That does resonate. I think we wanted to leave. I think we wanted to leave gamers in the grappling, because it's not straightforward, because good intention, it doesn't always, because sometimes violence is needed, because and so who is the villain? What do we do? Like, what is unforgivable? When do we need a clean slate? Like all of these questions we don't even have answers to. And so, similar to what Remy was saying earlier, we didn't, rather than close the loop and let people feel like, I understand I know how to save the day, I know what's best for society. I think it was a desire to really keep just opening it up at the end, where every player got to sit and really reckon for themselves, like, what would I do? And how much control do I have in the outcome? Because humans be humans, and being alive is a very, very messy thing when we try to be alive with one another, or we try to keep each other alive, or we try to move forward in a good way. That's nothing about that is very easy.
Yeah, I would say about the ending, from a more kind of formal thematic places, that as Pinki was saying, that it's really, we really wanted the opening up and the widening of the we didn't want it to end it very much in a place where people felt like, oh yeah, that's I'm not thinking about it anymore, I did it, like I know the answers. And I think that's just something we also did in previous works of ours. This degree that, like, we wanted the work to bleed into people's lives in a sense, or like we wanted the work to continue to have a life or live beyond the its like form, like, I guess, boundaries in this way, because it does feel that's to a certain extent what art is supposed to do in many ways, and often if some, like, a work just kind of closes off and you're kind of complete and it's done, it does start to veer a little bit sometimes more towards product in that regard, because it's like, okay, this experience that you've had with this thing is now contained and over, and but we really did want to have this sense that, rushing towards the end and getting towards the end, it's this experience and we had to be honest with ourselves, as the writers. We got ourselves in a position where we're like, oh my god, the things that we're talking about, the things that we want to talk about, the things that we want to express, it just can't be contained. And like, but we have to, we have to draw a line here at this point that this is as much of the story as we're going to get at this time, and 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 for that to allow it to kind of like spill outwards. I'm making all these hand gestures again for people.
Yeah, I think especially in these times, to have answers to these huge existential and political questions, I think would be very dangerous. And so we often say in the room, to avoid completing the gesture, answering the question, but rather than leave the question for in the hands of those engaging, in the hands of the viewer, the audience member, the player, so that they can for themselves be in the grapple, in the question for them. Yeah. Rather than tell what we think is the best thing to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, so many video games give you choices, right? But the way that 1000 Times Resist did it, where you get, I mean, you're making dialogue choices throughout sometimes, but like the amount of impact those are having, I mean, maybe you guys could say, but I felt like it was kind of negligible for most of the game. And then you get to that final huge choice. And I guess I was just, it was so impactful because I felt like it was really reflecting to me both the actual power of choice that we have in our real lives. And I think very rarely video games, when they give you choice, do you actually feel how powerful those choices are. So it was something that really left me sitting with that. And also like the impact of making no choice, or the impact of like trying to, if you take everyone with you, how poorly that goes. Like, so yeah, it was really fucking powerful ending. Y'all crushed it. Is my very like unarticulate way to put it.
It haunted us for like 6 months.
Oh my gosh.
Well, I mean, this is something that, reflecting upon it, it's just like, people often think that, narrative games to a certain extent are perhaps simpler to make than mechanically system deep games, which is like, I think actually not true at all. I think narrative games are extremely difficult to make because so much of what you have to do is you can't rely on the system to be emergent for you, right? Like a lot of this game was very handmade in that way, and then also the additional risk you take when you do a narrative game is that the ending could sink it, right? Which is not something that where you're like, if I played Elden Ring and I got to the end, which is what happened to me, I was like, this ending, whatever. But I'm not like, oh my god, I hate Elden Ring now, Whereas with narrative games, it really is like, you could really, it's a lot of responsibility and a lot of stakes for endings. And as the storytellers that we are, at least the storyteller that I feel like I am, I don't like ending things. I just want, and to a certain extent, it's reflected in the game. I just want time to march forward and forward and forward and forward and have things mutate and be strange and weirder and weirder. And I'm just thinking out loud about endings. It did haunt me, at least, for a while. And I think to a certain extent, the ending that we got to was us being emotionally honest about endings as well. So
yeah.
Well, speaking of endings, it is time to end the podcast. I know, but time is up for today's session of Pixel Therapy. Thanks to everyone who tuned in live or who's listening to this after the podcast release. We really hope that all of the thoughts and feelings that we all shared today gave you some thoughts and feelings of your own. Pinki and Remy, thank you both so much for joining us. How can people follow each of you and your work? Pinki, do you want to start?
Yeah. Me, not on the interwebs these days, but you can find me on Instagram at Pinki_Yinky.
Amazing. And Remy?
You can find me on Twitter at RemySiu, RemySiu, and that's the same for Instagram. And then, of course, there's the 1000 Times Resist Twitter, which is just at 1000xRESIST.
Amazing. Folks, if you want more Pixel Therapy, you can come check us out at patreon.com/pixeltherapypod. We live stream games and our conversations about them on Wednesdays and Sundays here on youtube.com/@pixeltherapypod. And of course, you can also support the show by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts and following us on Twitter @pixeltherapypod. That stuff is all just as important, and we appreciate it just as much.
Finally, since we like to put our money and our energy where our mouth is, we end every episode with a recommended side quest. As always, Free Palestine. Please visit tinyurl.com/OP-Olive-Branch. Operation Olive Branch is a grassroots collective effort to amplify Palestinian voices and their GoFundMes. It's a great way to give direct aid to folks who need it. You can visit that link. Again, it's tinyurl.com/OP-Olive-Branch to learn more, or visit their Instagram page @Operation Olive Branch.
Thank you for that side quest, Spencer. Thank you again to our guests. That is our show for today. So go forth, run a story mission, level up some stats, and don't forget to hug an NPC every now and then. We'll be back soon with some more Pixel Therapy. All right, bye-bye.